going to the gemba, going to where the work is done. As they say, you can't learn martial arts in a classroom. You have to go to the dojo and get knocked about a bit, and that's how you're going to learn martial arts. And that is lean, because only by going to the gemba and seeing where the work is done will you appreciate more clearly what your customers actually want rather than what you think they want. I would strongly recommend try being the buyer. Try being the buyer on the other side and see how your sales team are performing. You have a sales goal of this amount for this quarter. That is an output. That is not an outcome. That does not measure customer value at all. Paul Akers, one creative VP, said, the most important thing we do is teaching and training our staff and developing a culture of continuous improvement. That's it. That is the most important thing Toyota does. Everything else is secondary to that.
Hello, Matt. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
So my guest today is Matt Gaskin. Matt has been a consultant for nearly 3 decades, I'm guessing. And he's operated across a number of industries. And of late, he's spent most of his career operating in the area of lean. Now, many of you will not have any idea what lean is. So we're going to kick off with a quick introduction, and then we're going to go into some definitions so that people understand the relevance to their role in sales.
Lean is about putting human beings at the center of everything. In the words of Teacher, it's giving people work that is worthy of human beings. It sits on 3 principles. That's respect for your team, for the customer, and for yourself. Humility, the ready willingness to admit that you might be wrong and somebody else might always have a better idea, because we're mostly wrong most of the time. And finally, the last thing is continuous improvement, the idea that you must continuously improve, make small improvements every day.
Okay, so let's have some definitions. Mm-hmm. What is a process and what is an operator?
Well, a process is generally a series of activities that produce a predetermined output. And the operator is the person who operates that process. Now, you could have owner operators, people who actually own the process too. Within Lean, the process operator is generally empowered to improve the process and change the process as they see fit, on an ongoing basis.
Okay, so if we think about the process of selling, and we think about it through the lens of Lean, what would we stop doing that breaks the 3 principles?
You would
respect.
Respect. Well, obviously you're not.
Not that it was a leading question or anything.
No, you weren't leaning against an open door with that one, were you? You would stop creating arbitrary targets for your sales staff internally before we even start talking to the customer. Just because the organization has a sales goal doesn't necessarily mean it's realistic, and particularly if it's not really informed by what the sales team are telling them, how they're performing, in the marketplace, where they stand in terms of competition and pricing and the rest of it. You would also obviously stop. I'm going to say the word. You would stop lying to your customers. You would stop fabricating, because that's just incredibly disrespectful to them.
And just let me intervene. Lying means exaggerating, mm-hmm. underselling and over-delivering, because then you lied twice. Mm-hmm. Omission, mm-hmm. lack of transparency,
yep,
and the failure to mention something that might be material or come back and bite them later. Mm-hmm. Anything like that is lying. Don't do it.
Yep,
follow up friends' advice. If you always tell the truth, that way you don't have to remember anything.
That's true. You would also stop, as I've heard you describe it many times in the past, Marcus, show up and throw up. Because that is a waste of the potential buyer's time. They haven't asked for that information. They don't care about how your company was started and how many people work there now. They couldn't care less about how many widgets you're selling into what vertical. They don't care. They will have most likely very pointed questions. And to to show up with a big slide deck and show them all that stuff is actually disrespectful of their time. So that would be another attitude, another behavior that I would say you would stop doing.
Absolutely. You can save yourself hundreds and hundreds of hours of your life and recover it by never, ever showing anyone another PowerPoint.
Absolutely, yeah. And then in terms of humility, you would know that obviously objections are going to come, you're going to have to handle objections, but there might be other people, there might be other sales leaders in your organization who are better than you are. And in your humility, you would probably go and might be an idea to go and talk to them, kind of ask them for some advice rather than trying to kind of power through on your own.
And I'm going to extend that because I think it's really important that because we're talking about a process and the outcome, the objective, the job to be done is to attract, engage, enroll, activate, keep, expand, co-create, and generate hot referrals from a customer for life.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to design a process to deliver that outcome, then that humility would also extend to departments outside of your normal remit if you're in sales. Personally, I would start with procurement and finance, because at some point, if you're selling anything big ticket or important, procurement and finance are going to have a say. Operations, the consumer, the person who actually ends up having to live with the payoffs or the misery, and the customer, the person who pays and renews. You need to understand about all of these people and where they fit into the value chain. And in my mind, we're so deficient in sales and sales management and leadership and training and L&D because we're so fixated on trying to get the transaction to happen that we miss the 85, 90% that actually really matters and gives certainty.
Yeah. So I've recently had a bit of a career change, Marcus, and this kind of speaks to what I've recently experienced. So I left the corporate world and I do lean consulting. I do still do lean consulting, but I've bought a business that we design and print T-shirts and other promotional goods for mainly for colleges, but also for businesses across the US. And what I've learned is it's something. This is a lean principle. You can't learn martial arts in the classroom. You have to go and do it. Customers will come to you. They'll say, "Oh, could you design a T-shirt for us?" I'm going to plug my business, by the way. It's called awesomeistees.com.
Are you wearing one now?
I actually am, yeah. Because I went to another networking meeting this morning. Yeah, awesomeistees.com. Anyway, you get a request from a customer, and they say, hey, "Could you design us a shirt for this event we're having on campus?" Yeah, sure I can. Sure we can. Let's do that. And they'll say, "We need this by such and such a time." Okay, that's fine. We can do that. And it needs to be, this amount of this size, and we want it in this colors, and this is the design color palette, and blah 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 blah. And by the way, the delivery date is 1 month or 2 months hence. Great. That is a dream customer because they've just told you everything that you need to get to where you need to be.
Yeah.
But some customers don't know when they want it. You're facilitating their ability to buy something. They kind of know what they want. They don't really know. But it is extremely disrespectful to them to go and try to ram something down their throat. So you should buy this, and it should be this, this, and this. That is very, very disrespectful. So my whole career up to this point was really on the corporate side of things, and I'm the classic case of hit 40, can't do the corporate world anymore, banging out and bought a small business. And I'm really getting to relearn and reapply those things that I know intrinsically from lean, from all the work I've done in lean, that you should be doing. But it really depends on what's valuable to your customers. So some customers are going to order things with lead times that are measured in weeks, and then others will order things with lead times measured in months or even years. And so you have to be cognizant of who you're dealing with and what their needs are. What is the outcome that we're looking for here? In lean, an outcome is a more nebulous concept, let's say, and it's difficult to measure. So we want to increase customer satisfaction. That's wonderful. How do you measure that? Well, we could issue some surveys, but people probably won't fill them in because most people don't. I know I very rarely fill a survey in. But if we would increase customer satisfaction by reducing our lead times, well, that is a target condition. If our lead time is typically 2 weeks, this is how you could apply lean in sales. You could say, well, let's say your time to close is typically 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. We would like to reduce that by 20%. Now, it might not be possible to do that, in reality. But there should at least be some kind of goal to do that, to some kind of measure whereby we could actually measure if we are improving lead time. And then of that saving, what was due to the seller improving their process, and then the buyer improving their process. So there are lots of nebulous things here, but in terms of outcomes, they are those nebulous things you can't really measure very well, which is why in most sales organizations they like to measure outputs because they're easily measurable. You have a sales goal of this amount for this quarter. That is an output. That is not an outcome. That does not measure customer value at all. Okay, what value has the customer got for it? Well, we don't really bother with measuring that. And what collateral effects are you going to have in the future when you've missold something to that customer and they figure out that they didn't like it and they come back with a raft of complaints and possibly a lawsuit? That is measuring by output. You are measuring by outcome driven by target conditions, and that's a completely different paradigm for sales to operate in.
I'm absolutely with you. There are a couple of things I want to build on. First of all, I think that most salespeople, it's not that they're bad at what they do. What they have is a system that sets them up to fail. And if anyone is in any doubt about this, just reverse the metrics. When you hear marketing say we got 3% click-through rate, that means you had a 97% miss rate.
Mm-hmm.
Then, of the 3%, what percentage of those are actually in your ideal customer profile? And how many are in your total addressable market but cannot buy, will not buy, or you should not sell to them because either you will be a bad fit and they will churn, or you'll make the sale and then they'll never make it through the onboarding process, or they'll be just a customer from hell and tie up your resources. Now, all of that ripple effect could have been prevented in the design phase.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'd like people to really think about is, where is the waste? Because one of the principles that I teach, and I believe it's a lean principle too, is look for the stuff that isn't working first and stop doing that. Mm-hmm. Partly because it's massively costly and inefficient. It also then creates process and organizational drag. And the one thing that I've come to realize is that the reason people hesitate is they doubt your ability to execute, or their ability to execute, because they think it will backfire on them. You can't do what you say you can. They can't do what you say they need to do. And you haven't found the common ground. Mm-hmm. Now, I believe our job is to sell like Michelangelo carved David. He removed all the bits that weren't David. Mm-hmm. And to my mind, that is what lean and sales, where lean and sales really intersect. So I'd love to dig into that.
If you approach a lean transformation from the point of view of removing waste, the lean is about removing waste from processes, you're going to fail. It won't work.
Well, it is about removing waste. It's not about removing cost. It's about removing friction. It's about removing the obstacles to the operator being able to perform to the standard intended.
Yeah, so the Japanese have a metaphor of, imagine a rocky mountain stream, and you're basically there to take all the rocks out so the water flows more smoothly down the stream. That's what lean is. You're getting the water, the value, to where it's needed, when it's needed, in the amount that it's needed. That's what lean is.
No more, no less.
Yeah, and that is the outcome that we want now. To do that, we've got a lot of rocks to get out of the mountain stream.
Yeah, absolutely. So in human relationships, and sales, let's face it, is just a microcosm of life. Essentially, what we have to do when we're designing a really effective buying facilitation process is we need to understand that the one thing that the buyer wants to do is make the right decision with no comeback.
Yeah.
So given that we actually have agency over the process, and every touch point is likely to be predictable if you're operating in a relatively known market. Mm-hmm. So is it not reasonable to start with the blank sheet of paper and say, well, how do I create these customers for life who get more than just ROI? And given identical conditions, they would sign up 100 times in a row without a moment's hesitation. How do I design that?
Yeah, it's a very straightforward question with not a very easy answer. I think about how can I make it easier for my customers to, just hit accept on that QuickBooks estimate. Maybe the way I'm doing it, maybe sending an estimate through QuickBooks isn't the right thing to do. Maybe I should be doing something else. But I don't know that. And I might be wrong. Actually, maybe it is the right thing. The only way that I could figure out if it's the wrong thing is to experiment. And that's where lean comes in, because lean is not about copying. So I'll give you an example. So if you just copy, if you saw, that company over there, let's take this to a manufacturing service, not necessarily specific to sales. That company over there, they 5S their workplace. They've
Explain what 5S is for the audience.
Sort, standardize, shine, set in place, and there's another one. It's basically make the place spick and span. Make your workplace spick and span, so there's a place for everything in place, everything's clean, serviced, ready to use, ready to go. Now, if you did that, if you thought, oh, they're doing lean over there and they're using this 5S, and we're going to 5S our workplace, that's great. You just make a pile of waste really, really neat and tidy and shiny. But you'd still have the same waste around. You're not looking to remove. Now, you might be able to move around a little easier because you might not have piles of junk in the workplace. But copying isn't lean. So do not copy. If two Toyota plants are producing the same vehicle, but one Toyota plant finds a way of getting the windscreen on, say, 50% faster than the other one, then that information will not be shared across plants. Why? Because it's disrespectful to the plant that hasn't made that improvement yet. To go to them and say, do this, do that process this way. Why is that disrespectful? Because it discourages thinking. Whereas you and I both know that in a Western organization, as soon as you found out that X office or X plant had done something better, it would immediately be copied. Check your brain in at the door, don't think about it, just go and copy it. Now, what Toyota might do is they might give a challenge to the plant that hasn't made that improvement. We would like you to find a way of getting that windscreen on 20 or 50% faster. But they wouldn't tell them how to do it, because that's deeply disrespectful to their human agency of sitting and thinking about how they can make that improvement.
Love that. I am going to challenge it, however, for the simple reason that if it's been learned before, what I do with my clients is I introduce a failure log.
Mm-hmm.
We have a Friday failure meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has responsibility around a version of Racy 2.0 that I've created. And the idea is that every failure is not only recorded, but then on Fridays, we work out how to fix it. And it goes into a weekly experiment with daily activities assigned to individuals who are best placed and closest to the problem or closest to the impact, so that they can lead. And having a feedback loop where we work across the organization, so that maybe once a month, different teams work together. So I like to have procurement and sales. I like to have finance and IT. I want to make sure that these teams are working together so that they can see the impact they have. And every one of them has a window to the customer in their job description. Because I think every employee is responsible, not accountable, but responsible for the brand, the financial health, and the security of the business.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to create that behavior where in all their thinking, they're consequential in their decision making, that I think is where you release incredible capability, because our job as managers is to empower other people to meet their full potential.
So failure log's not a bad idea at all. In fact, it's very much in line with lean principles. There is a plant, and they have I guess they don't call it a failure wall, but all of the negative news articles involving Toyota vehicles, there's a whole wall of them. And, the employees can go and look at that wall every day. And then you can walk down the wall looking at all the different things they did wrong. And then at the end of the wall, there'll be some things that they did right. It's not all doom and gloom. We're not just the worst motor manufacturing company in the world. But that failure wall, I guess they call it something different, exists as a spur to kind of take them onto something better. And then there is something at the end to say, yeah, you know what, we're not terrible, but these ideas or these news stories are why we have our ideas of continuous improvement, constant process improvement, constant increase, built-in quality. This is why we do what we do here.
Well, again, I'm going to take it a bit further, because I see the failures as the biggest upside opportunities. Within every organization I look at, there is latent upside. There is gold under their feet, around them, everywhere, and they're walking past it every day, and they're going out and trying to hunt for new business. Now, when I see that, that tells me that I can give them back anywhere between 2 and 4 days a week. Because in most sales organizations, salespeople are wasting anything between 60 and 80% of their time on busy work that attracts and engages with the TAM, the total addressable market, who cannot buy, will not buy, or should not buy. Well, if you never attracted those, and this then requires customer success, sales, and marketing to work together and find out why it is people don't buy from us, why they do buy from us, who's left us, why they left us, and what we need to do to win them back. Now, there's all this incredible value by looking at the downside. Run to the sound of gunfire. Look intentionally for evidence that you are wrong, and go and find people who can prove you wrong. Because if you can find that out now, it's not going to come and bite you later. And the beauty is, if something is failing north of 80% of the time, in any other department, you would consider that to be a broken system, and you wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. You'd probably start with a blank sheet of paper. In sales and marketing, it seems to be okay to have a 99.5% failure rate, and 3% win rate is considered to be gold standard in some parts. That's insanity.
Well, Taiji said that and you could apply this to sales as well, the production line that never stops is either perfect or terrible. Now, I used to share a flat when I lived in Surrey with a guy who was in sales. He performed very well. He was very, very good at sales. Did he work very hard? No, I'll tell you that. I used to share a flat with him. I know he didn't work very hard. You don't have to necessarily work very hard if you're going after the right people. We are running around doing all this busy work. Taiji, although he was a hard taskmaster, he would work his trainees hard. He said, let idle workers play rather than do unnecessary work. Why? Because they have another saying at Toyota, walking makes people tired. So doing all this unnecessary busy work tires you out. And it leaves you tired for the things that you do need to focus on, where you need to be at your 100%. So if you applied lean principles to sales, you're going to see an awful lot of change. And the pace of change can be relentless and can be intimidating for some to embrace. And I'll give you I like to give you lots of examples. I'll give you another example. In one 6-week period, a manager under training at Toyota produced 25 different changes. They made 75 recommendations, and they reduced the required headcount for where they were from 19 heads to 15 heads. There were no redundancies. People were just redeployed. So that is, people think, if we adopt lean, we're just going to tidy everything out, then everything will be much neater and tidy, and we just carry on as we're going. No, if you're in sales, you have to start experimenting in terms of your customers, your messaging, your fit, as you describe your ideal customer, the people that should absolutely buy from you and should buy by default. It doesn't. There's no other choice of that.
Well, this then speaks to a real conceit within sales. We should stop asking how do we close more, and start asking what conditions make it safe for someone to choose what's right for them, and trust that we won't punish that honesty. When you've had those conversations, did you have to try and convince them to buy, or did you go through the process of trying to understand what the outcome was that they wanted and design to that?
So being a lean consultant is a little difficult. It is a little different in that there's only really one key thing that a lean organization needs. And this was discovered by several companies have gone lean, and some have used consultants and some haven't. Consultants have their place. I'm not knocking all consultants. I mean, I am one. But many organizations have done it without consultants. And one of them is a company called Herman Miller Office Furniture in the US. And they discovered that the only thing that they absolutely needed that was totally, you couldn't compromise on, was a personnel development or personnel management system. Because remember, this is about people. Everybody always talks about lean. Lean's about tools and processes and taking waste out. No, it's about people. It's about creating work worthy of human beings. If you think that work should be that it's okay for having very repetitive, boring tasks, particularly now in the kind of the modern age of automation and AI, then I think you'll probably find yourself being overtaken by people who've got better ideas.
Fair.
The other thing about lean is that, or, you know, certainly lean consultant, you really need to understand where people are coming from in terms of what they want for their organization. And this is where it kicks into sales. What do I mean by that? I have seen lean done from the point of view of, we're going to have a continuous improvement person to come in and do improvements continuously. And I have seen lean done from the perspective of, we are going to lean a function or a department. And neither of those two approaches work. The continuous improvement person has very, very little impact. And once you try to lean a function but manage them mechanistically, that won't work, because the foundational principles under which that you're using underneath this agenda fly directly contrary to the agenda, particularly in finances, actually. So I would advocate that you have to have 100% buy-in from everybody in the organization, right up to the C-suite, to do lean well. And there are many good examples of that you can go and find on the internet. There's Ryan Tierney, Lean Made Simple podcast on YouTube is a great example of a very young guy who was he's in manufacturing, who did lean well and led from the front as the CEO. And then there's Paul Akers at FastCap, who anybody who's in lean will know who Paul Akers is. He has a lean organization, and he leads it from the front. Now, if you are going to go and try and apply lean to your sales, let's say you're in sales and you're listening to this, and I'm kind of sold on this lean stuff. I think we should be doing more of this. I've got some good news and some bad news for you. The good news is lean probably can help you, and applying the principles of lean, humility, continuous improvement, and respect will help you. The bad news is they will not help you if you don't have buy-in from the top, because you're still going to get those sales targets. Those arbitrary sales targets are going to come down, and you're going to be looking at the problem from the perspective of the customer in terms of what value is the customer getting out of this, what's a value add to them, what's non-value add, and what's business non-value add. And the two, and never the twain shall meet. So you cannot operate in a lean manner in a mechanistic organization. I've seen it tried over and over again, and it doesn't work. So that's the caveat that I would put around this entire conversation regarding sales.
Understood. And that's why I think we need to also integrate some of the more psychological and human disciplines, and think of it like a product or a category designer as well. Mm-hmm. Remember, people do not buy your product or service, they rent an outcome. Mm-hmm. And the forces for change and the forces for staying stuck are at work. And unless you understand those moving parts and the context, then lean isn't going to work anyway, because we need to focus on the lived experience of the operator and the constraints that they face because of the economy, because of the resources available to them, because of internal buy-in and so on. So when you're designing your go-to-market function, it's much simpler to start with a blank sheet of paper and ask the question, what is the outcome that our customer is looking to hire, and why are we best placed to serve them in executing that well? If you can't find that intersection, chances are you're going to spend a lot of time talking to the wrong people. So it starts in the design phase and being clear about what the outcome is, and then working backwards from there to work out what has to be in place beforehand for the outcome to be possible, and to map backwards to where we are today through the lived experience and the real world context that they're operating in. If the market is operating in a state of psychological depression, also known as recession, then you have to factor that in, because you have to meet your customer where they are. So this is where mapping to the buyer's journey is really key. And so understanding that selling is really about creating the conditions for the buyer to buy the right thing in the right way and derive the value they intended, it actually makes things a lot clearer. But it does require a hell of a lot of work up front so you don't have to work when you're in front of the customer.
Well, probably, I would say between 70 and 90% of all waste is built in at the design phase. And that's whether you're talking about a product or a service. If you fail in the design phase, you're going to have a load of waste that you simply cannot get rid of because it's built in. And the other thing I would say is a lot of organizations have taken to being their customer. Have you ever been your customer? Have you ever ordered something from your store? Or have you ever acquired your service for a while? Have you ever seen what it's actually like? And you've even seen this move internally. Now, obviously, airline staff are not the customers of the airline CEO, but there have been plenty of stories recently with airline CEOs going on board and doing the trolley service on a flight to see what the cabin staff have to deal with, and also what their customers want to deal with. The people sitting in the seats that are paying for the flights, what are their interests? What do they want? And that's something that you can't learn in a C-suite. You maybe you were a cabin staff a long time ago. If you've gone from cabin staff to CEO, clearly you've done very, very well. But I would say that would be an unusual path to take. So there is no substitute for going to the Gemba, going to where the work is done. As they say, you can't learn martial arts in a classroom. You have to go to the dojo and get knocked about a bit, and that's how you're going to learn martial arts. And that is lean. Because only by going to the Gemba and seeing where the work is done will you appreciate more clearly what your customers actually want rather than what you think they want. So you cannot substitute that. Now, in some cases, it might not always be very easy, but if there is a way for people in the organization to experience the service, the product or service that their organization provides, in a non-preferential way, obviously, if you get an order from the CEO of, X widgets that your company makes, and you've got to deliver it to his house, somebody sees that order coming, it's going to be rushed and gold-plated. So you have to try to do it in a non-preferential way. But that would be something that I would strongly recommend. Try being the buyer. Try being the buyer on the other side and see how your sales team are performing.
Mark Schaefer wrote a very good book called Marketing Rebellion. And in there, he makes the point that you must think as your customer, not about your customer or about what you can do to your customer. Mm-hmm. You have to think as them. Mark Goulston also says that what people need, the number one driver for human beings, is to be heard, feel felt, and be understood. Mm-hmm. And if you look at why people leave their job, it's not that they leave their managers. It's because the manager has failed to create the conditions where they can do their best work every day. And if they find it difficult to do their best work, then they will become a flight risk. The thinking is really the issue here. And the lack of questioning, because what I see is this trust execution drift happening across the organization. And it starts with a single point of failure. A bad decision, a legacy process that maybe once was useful, but the context has changed and now it's causing you harm, or some form of venal, egotistical decision that doesn't take into effect the consequences and impact on others, and the failure to ask, well, who pays the negative price for my positive payoff?
Okay, so there's 2 points I'd like to make there. So first of all, on the really understanding your customer, one Toyota product manager spent months driving around the USA in a Toyota Sienna because he wanted to understand from the American point of view what is good, what is bad about a Toyota Sienna. And it led to almost a complete redesign of the inside of the car because it was designed in Japan. In Japan, they drive relatively short distances. In America, they drive relatively long distances in some very hot climates. I live in Florida. Let me tell you about hot climates. And so for Americans, having lots of drink holders is very important. So they increased the number of drink holders in the car. And they made several other changes, but they wanted to really understand. And the only way that product manager could really understand his product from the customer's point of view was to go and be the customer. And that meant 2 months out of the office driving this thing around the States, from state to state, seeing what was going on. And the other thing is, from what you've just said about this egotistical point of view, I think that, and I would be equally guilty of this. I'm not disparaging anybody. I include myself. When you get promoted across, beyond a certain level into management, you can develop a bit of an ivory towers complex, and you cannot afford to have that in a lean organization. If you have that, it's not a lean organization. I'll give you another example. There's a story of a machinist operating a CNC machine or some form of mill. Now, anybody who's ever been near any of these things, and I have, knows that there is a huge sump full of coolant fluid that they use to cool the tools as the tools are cutting metal. And he was having problems with his mill, and the parts that were coming out were not good. They were defective. And he was standing, kind of looking at this mill, scratching his head, wondering what's going on. And the plant manager, who's basically, God in a Toyota plant, he's the guy in charge of the entire plant, happened to be walking by doing a Gemba walk, as they do, going to the Gemba. And he stopped him and he said, what's wrong? What's wrong? And he said, oh, this machine's not working. And the plant manager rolled his shirt sleeves up and immediately put his hands into the sump, into all the coolant oil, and pulled out all the chips and said, the answer will be in these chips. Mm-hmm. Now, is that ivory tower stuff? No, it's very humble. It speaks to humility, and it speaks to respect for your team, and it speaks to the absolutely essential element of coaching. If you have a lean organization, you're going to spend 50% of your day as a manager coaching, at least. You have to teach and coach and train these people. It is the most important thing that you'll do the entire day. And I think in a lot of the organizations that I've worked in, it's an afterthought at best.
It is. And the really interesting thing is going to the Gemba is effectively operational coaching.
Yes.
And it means that you coach on the job in the moment with impact. That operator is never going to forget that lesson. And it becomes a story that then gets told, and it becomes part of culture. Mm-hmm. And if we want to create an environment where people behave with integrity, even under pressure, then we have to create the conditions for them to feel that they have a voice, they are trusted, they can do their best work, that they're operating in an adult environment where they make adult commitments and they hold themselves to account for the promises that they have made, and they are in service to something bigger than their commission check.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And one of the things that you would really need to think about is if you're going to do this, it's slightly off the path, but I think it's really important if you're talking about having an organization that, let's say you do all of these things and you coach and you spot all of these problems. We tend to have an affinity for making action lists, having a long list of things that we need to do. And I've been equally guilty of this. You go to an improvement project and you make a load of you make a list of all the things you need to improve. Oh, well, this needs improvement, that needs improvement. The information that we get from business development is poor. The integration with the support we get from finance is poor. We need to improve that, and we need to do this, and we need to do that. And then you go around the room, and the different stakeholders say, well, I think mine is important, but let's say you're dealing with a reasonable group of people, which 90% of people are. You will always get that one person in the room or not in the room who, when you finish the exercise, will come back and say, well, none of that's true, and I know what the problem is. That is a problem person, because any certainty about what the problems are like that is a big red flag, because you can't have certainty unless you've measured it. Well, but let's say you say, well, we've got all these list of things that we can do. What do we think we should do? And then most of the time you're going to say, well, we think there's high priority, medium priority, low priority, high impact, medium impact, low impact, and you kind of vote. And you say, well, I think we should tackle this first. And that's not the right way of doing it, because if you actually had facts about what was really going on, you would need to vote on it. But we tend to fumble our way through things. And I've mentioned it again. And the reason I'm saying this is because I mentioned it earlier. You have to go from empirical data. You have to go from the evidence. You have to test hypotheses and see what's really, really happening. And for sales, that is going to involve people going out of what they want to do, and what they are motivated to do through commission checks is go out and sell stuff. They are not going to want to be conducting experiments on what's working and what's not working for their entire team. They tend to probably be more headstrong and focused on what's going to work for them. I don't know what you think about it, Marcus. That's just my perspective.
At the end of the day, you have to create systems that deliver the intended outcome. Given that you're going to have difficult people, why would you not design and prepare and practice for those moments? When someone tells you that they have an objection, what they're actually telling you is, I don't feel safe. I'm uncertain. Mm-hmm. It may be because I have an attachment to the old way. I feel threatened. Well, I've always maintained in my training world and coaching world that there's no such thing as a learning disability. There's only a teaching disability.
Yeah.
And I seem to remember that Taiichi Ono had something similar.
Yeah, he said if the learner hasn't learned, then the teacher hasn't taught.
Right. Okay. So yeah, absolutely. And another very useful maxim that I've come up with is when the teacher is ready, the student will appear.
Yeah.
Because more often than not, you learn way more from your students than they ever do from you,
Yeah.
because they show you how you're wrong. And as a manager, your people will help you to work out the friction. They'll help you identify the bottlenecks. Why do managers spend so much of their time trying to control, trying to manage or supervise, and then spend their time faffing around in pointless meetings and reporting when that's soul destroying for them? That it's the hardest job there is in many organizations, because you've got pressure from above, you can get sued from below, your peers are scrutinizing you, and your customers can come after you too, then the general public and the media. So you're stuck somewhere in the middle trying to walk this tightrope. So my question is, how does one thrive in this era of massive volatility, uncertainty, forced, rapid, unwanted change, and anxiety without compromise, without burnout, without selling out, and without being complicit?
Marcus, if I had the answer to that, I'd probably still be working in the corporate world. Probably would. I mean, the reason I left was because and this is going to be relevant to any business owners and like senior managers, VPs who listen to this. I did a reasonably good job, particularly early on in my career. I took processes that would take kind of 7 hours spread over a week, talking to various, and I compressed that into 5 minutes. I had an industrial placement where I automated my job to such an extent that I basically eliminated half of it, and caused another problem for the organization of, well, what do we do with that job role now? Because it was an industrial placement role that changed year after year. So now they've got basically half a job for the next person coming in, and they have to figure that out. So when you make these improvements, it in itself creates further problems that you need to solve.
When you have a system that is designed to serve you first, the behavioral science, the behavioral psychology, the neuroscience, the endocrinology, all we know about human behavior tells us that that will create a threat response in the brain. So 60% of all generated pipeline ends up in closed lost, no decision, according to the Jolt effect research that they did on 2 million calls. And 52% of that, i.e. 31% of all of the pipeline that organizations generate, pay for, pursue, goes into closed lost, no decision, because salespeople misread a moment where the buyer raises an objection, and instead of welcoming it and seeing it for what it is, which is an invitation to intimacy, where the buyer is saying, I do not feel safe. That is feedback, as far as I'm concerned. That tells me I've not created the conditions where the buyer feels psychologically safe to advance. That's a design problem. Because the next time I can go back, I can say, okay, well, what did I do beforehand that created the conditions where there was uncertainty, ambiguity, a perception of threat, or I created the conditions of anticipated buyer's remorse by saying something that made them believe for a moment it won't work and it'll backfire, and they'll have a little imagination and they will create an imprinted image, possibly even a moving video with sound and catastrophe and all of the emotions attached to it. And the next time I speak to them or try to contact them, that is the peak emotional anchor that I've created. Now, long-winded way of saying, you can double the closable pipeline by not doing that one thing. You can literally double the bottom of your pipeline in 90 to 120 days and collect cash from ideal customers by not handling objections.
Yeah, I do wonder from the buyer's point of view. So in my career so far, I've been responsible, not in sales, but in terms of everything else I've done. All the PowerPoint decks I've produced and all of the Word documents and the Excel sheets and the whiteboards and everything else. I've been responsible for them. They've been my work, and I put them in front of my manager, my line manager, and they've been approved or reworked, rejected, whatever it might be. But it's been my work. And the same in sales. The sales eat what they kill. Now imagine being a buyer. Now imagine going from that salesperson where you are in the mindset of I eat what I kill, I'm responsible for my own destiny. Now imagine being a buyer where every day you're going to talk to people are potentially a huge who you don't know, and you've never, most of them probably you don't know, you never met, and are potentially a huge risk to your career if you mess up.
And if you're a professional buyer, you're probably meeting somewhere between 8 and 15 a week, and sometimes a day if you're very transactional.
Mm-hmm.
And you've seen every tactic, every technique over and over again, and probably done better. So this is the other thing. Stop with the technique. Ninja moves. You're not doing yourself any favors because the buyer, well, if they're a naive buyer, and by that I'm not being disrespectful, what I mean is that they're green behind the gills because they don't buy your stuff or they don't buy very often. They've got millions of years of evolution and hardwiring telling their brain when you're a threat, because the brain evolved in conditions where largely everything was trying to eat you or kill you. You had to make rapid decisions with very limited information, and they could be life or death, and you couldn't trust anyone. That is the brain that we've got still. And unless you meet your buyer where they are, your employee where they are, you're going to find yourself in hot water very quickly. The research on this is truly depressing. With the person you have the closest relationship with, you will mind read wrong 70% of the time at least. Okay, I'm definitely way higher than that. And for close acquaintances, you will be wrong 90% of the time when you make assumptions and so on. And with strangers, you have next to no chance at all. So why not create a process that removes the threat, the ambiguity, the uncertainty from the buyer's brain, so they never have to be concerned about you?
Yeah, and that speaks to authenticity. How do you convey that authenticity? And I don't know how you would do this. I'm asking you, how would you convey that authenticity on a cold call?
Well, my question is, why would you cold call?
Okay, let's say you qualify this person, you know that they are potentially your ideal customer.
Well, again, just take a quick step back, and this is a little plug for me.
Yeah.
My hypothesis, which works in the real world, is why not create a hot sales qualified prospect flywheel instead of lead magnets and funnels and all this other drivel, by building it back from the outcomes our customers want, and create a journey that or a sales journey that aligns with their buying journey, the natural process that they go through. Because our job is not to try and create false urgency or to convince the customer. Our job is to identify the catalysts for change that already exist within their business, and to identify the motivations to change now. If those two things aren't in place, you have no business selling it to them. Simple as that. And that speaks to a little bit of integrity. So being able to recognize, and this is a really fundamentally important lesson, if people take nothing away other than this, it's to be very clear who your ICP is, your ideal customer profile, who your non-ICP is. These are the amber reds. I'll come back to that in a minute. And your anti-ICP. The anti-ICP is easy. They're just red. Okay? But the amber reds are the ones who you should never pursue. They're the ones who cannot buy, will not buy, or you should not sell to. Your number one priority is to identify the amber reds in your pipeline and in your marketing. And whatever you do, stop attracting them and disqualify them before any human being actually touches them. Because if you do that, you will recover, on average, about 80% of your marketing spend. Now,
I think that
you can redeploy that.
You certainly can. You should probably put it to much more productive use. Yeah, I think that's completely true. But then we're going to, if you were to apply lean to that, like lean principles, you would say, well, how can we do that? Because what a lot of organizations we talked about break even in the last show. A lot of organizations will say, how much would it cost us to enter X market with X product? Oh, the product would be X amount. Well, the market price of that is actually 20% below what would be our price, so we're just not going to do it. Whereas the lean question would be, how can we do it for that amount? What could we do to our process? What could we do to change it? So if you were to apply that to the problem that Eva was, how can we go about actively disqualifying prospects, which is probably not something that a lot of sales teams are going to want to focus on too much.
Well, that then speaks to the question, why not?
Yeah, well, that's your second why.
Well, the obvious response to it is because our marketing isn't generating ideal customers. It's generating activity and busy work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we spoke to our product managers who are out in the field and we brought our customer success people, we'd probably find out a whole heap of stuff that would help us to sell and market better.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll give you an example of how this kind of process worked in the real world. So it wasn't with sales; it was with the service center, and the service center is effectively, or the rest of the organization was effectively a customer of the service center. They are receiving the data that the service center is feeding them, and let's just say the customers were not very happy. The service center was terrible. They never do anything any good. All this stuff is. We were supporting a load of, let's just say, electromechanical devices out in the field, and the information that we were getting back from the service center just was always subpar. Incidents not handled properly, problems not resolved properly, always a problem. And then somebody had the idea of let's ask Matt to go down to the service center and sit in there for a few weeks, turned out to be about months. And what I discovered was we would get a call about a problem on a device. And one of the service center staff would stand up and say, does anybody know what error code, blah, 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 on machine XYZ is? Oh, I think Steve might be, he's on his lunch. And I was like, well, what is going on here? Well, why are we not getting the right information? How do you not know what the error codes are? Well, we used to have the old documents, but they haven't been updated in years, and we've done loads of upgrades on the system since then, so they're generating all new error codes, and we don't know what they are. I'm sorry, you don't know what the error codes are, you're the service center. And all it really took was for somebody to go to the product trainers. Let's go to the people who understand the product really, really well, because they're kind of customers in this environment. Let's talk to them and ask them about all the error codes and what the resolution, what the help desk resolution could actually be. If there was any, there might not be, because sometimes they would arbitrarily just reset the device, and it wouldn't actually solve the problem at all. In fact, in some cases, maybe. So when we go and talk to them, and we'll jot down all the error codes, and we'll detail all of the resolution actions for that error code from the help desk and for the field engineers to go and fix the problem. And wouldn't you know, the help desk suddenly started doing really, really well. Once we got all that information down and put it into the hands of people and said, here you go, these are the error codes, this is all stuff, and then you have to fix the process so that those error codes are documented in the documents for when they do the updates. The engineers have to transmit that information to the help desk so they know what they're supporting. So it's the same kind of thing. If your salespeople are effectively kept in the dark because marketing is not generating the right information, then you're not going to have a very effective sales team.
What you've just described here is the core function of leaders, which is that their job is to understand the connections between the components and to ensure that the flow of work at each of the handover points creates the right experience for the customer and for the operators to be able to execute it excellently and with joy and satisfaction. Because if they come to work with joy and satisfaction, they will be highly engaged. Highly engaged staff, when you look at the S&P 500, there was a 10-year study, and those companies had a 500% higher return for shareholders than companies without. They had a 40% lower absentee, sickness, and conflict rate. It's just insane.
Yeah, let me tell you that those help desk staff were not highly engaged, not at all. It was a funereal atmosphere in the help desk.
And how did that change after this improvement so that they could do their job?
They were suddenly really happy because they were able to help people.
Ta-da. And this again is another critical element of selling and buying and managing and leading, which is that human beings are social primates. Mm-hmm. We derive enormous satisfaction from reciprocating where people have done us kindness and good, and except in a few notable exceptions where people have lost any constraint in terms of their greed and their entitlement, then people recognize when enough is enough and they can stop. And I think if we see human beings as human beings with enormous untapped potential, and we create the conditions for them to operate to the standard we expect, then we have done our job. But it's not just about creating process. We need to understand that part of this is recognizing and meeting the human being where they are, on the basis that they may be going through some tough times at home, or they may have a hang up that needs some help. And this is where coaching comes in. We've forgotten that human beings are fundamental to most organizations. When we only look at the organization as a balance sheet issue, then we forget relationship. We forget the intrinsic value of company knowledge, loyalty, and the retention of insight, those subtle nuances. And when you have organizations that have people who stay for a very long time, but they're constantly updating themselves because they approach this as a constant, never-ending improvement experimentation, that they are personally responsible, and that their KPIs drive improvement behavior, and that is recognized, rewarded, it's hero status if you can create that, then people aren't afraid to fail. They're not afraid to experiment. They won't hide their failures. And you start creating a culture where people step up. They lead when it's their turn to lead, and they step back when it's someone else's.
So there's a guy on YouTube, I mentioned it before, the Lean Made Simple podcast, a guy called Ryan Tierney. He runs a company called Seating Matters in Valley, Northern Ireland. He has it's globally speaking, it's a relatively small manufacturer, but they manufacture medical chairs for hospitals all around the world. And he started off with a WhatsApp, had all his employees on WhatsApp, and they all share little videos of little improvements they've made every day.
Nice.
So the entire organization, granted it's not a huge multinational, but the entire organization say, hey, look, I work in the fabric area and I've made this improvement. And everybody shares it. There was one episode where they just had a new sewing machine delivered. And they had a saying in that organization, when we first get the tool, that's the worst it will ever be. Because we will make so many improvements to it that it just basically isn't the same tool after 6 months. So that's how he did it. That's how he got it. And he didn't have any consultants. Nobody helped him do it. He just said, I'm just going to create this WhatsApp group. And then he did other things as well. He has morning meetings, and which I would argue is kind of vital for Lean, a good morning meeting. But one of the other things I've seen, which is really, really impressive and just comes from Toyota, and this is just a way to look at things in a different way. We've been talking this whole episode about empowering your people and looking after them, coaching them. But Toyota puts their org charts on their walls the opposite way to Western companies. So if you go into a Toyota manufacturing plant, I'm not sure if it's in every plant, but certainly in some of them, I think the one in Derby in the UK, you go into a Toyota manufacturing plant, the people on the front line are at the top of the org chart because they are the ones that are they are closest to delivering value to customers. And then with the levels of management underneath them, because they are further away from the customer value. That's how world-class looks at this. And I said earlier, 50% of Toyota managers, they spend in coaching and teaching and training. And when asked by Paul Akers, one Toyota VP said, the most important thing we do is teaching and training our staff and developing a culture of continuous improvement. That's it. That is the most important thing Toyota does. Everything else is secondary to that. So I went on and on about it on the previous podcast episode, but I just want to reiterate it again. It is all about culture, and you can't do it inauthentically. It has to be authentic, because if it's not authentic, people like me will just scoff at it, and then they'll leave anyway.
Well, again, in life in general, if you're inauthentic, people's brains will pick up on it, and if not once, over time they will, because people look for consistency, and our brains are pattern engines. So it's very difficult to hide if you don't really mean this. I've just noticed the time. We've run over quite a bit, so we'll wrap up. If you had your time again in your lean career, what would be the one thing that you would do differently earlier on?
In my lean career, I think I would have placed a greater emphasis on delivering value for people. So one of the things that really got me into it professionally, although I was studied it academically before, was I'm an Excel nerd, and I used to write lots of macros and make Excel do things that I wouldn't normally do, and talk to Word and PowerPoint and Outlook and do all these whizzy things because I used to like to help people. I used to hate to see people struggling with these processes that actually, if they just clicked a button, they could do all this stuff and save themselves a ton of time. So I automated my own job, and then I would automate everybody else's. I think that I would have put more emphasis on not just helping people, although that is important, value for people. What do they really value? Because being helped is not necessarily the same as being valued. Now, I can automate something, but I could automate a process for somebody tomorrow, and they could actually end up feeling threatened by it because, well, hang on a minute, you've just got rid of my job here, and my manager's going to start noticing. And so I am concerned about that. So I wish I had taken a bit more of a step back at the start, thought more deeply about it. What is it that we want to get out of this? Who do I need to talk to? Because if I automate this person, half of this person's job and make it go away, they could actually end up feeling threatened by it. Now, if you work in Toyota, that's not a worry because Toyota doesn't fire people because it makes things more efficient. It just redeploys. But if you work in an organization that doesn't necessarily have that idea, and I'm thinking about one particular person in mind who was also getting reasonably close to retirement, that could be threatening for them. Yeah. So that's one of the things that I would have done differently. I would have really thought about that human element because I've been like preaching about it on this podcast episode, but please rest assured that I'm only preaching about it because I've been guilty of it in the past.
Well, again, because I see that happen all the time, that's exactly what you have to plan and factor for when you're designing your go-to-market value chain. It's not about creating sales. It's about creating value for the customer and making sure that what you do is timely, relevant, and valuable on every touch. You also need to factor in that there are many moving parts. There are different stakeholders in the evaluation stage, in the decision stage, in the authorization and allocation stage. Because very often, if you're dealing with big ticket stuff, you make the sale, then you have to go through a negotiation with procurement. Well, to my mind, all of that stuff tells me that what you've done is you've fallen into the process of being supply side, not demand side first. Yeah. Both sides need to be satisfied, but you have to focus on the demand side first.
Yeah.
Matt, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, not really. Again, I felt that I came out. We talked about a lot of stuff that really doesn't work in the previous episode, and this episode I want to talk about those things that do work. And obviously, we're very focused on sales and selling, which is not necessarily my. Lean is my part of ship, and sales is most definitely Marcus's. So no, I would encourage people to look into Lean and to try to apply it where they can. But if you're in an organization that is never going to be that way and isn't interested, then don't try to force it. Perhaps if you have the opportunity, try to move to somewhere that would be willing to do that. There is an awful lot you can do, but on your own, that will make yourself stand out just by reducing costs and automating as much as you possibly can in your own area. And maybe you can try to spread some of those ideas to your team, upwards, down the side.
Maybe the next one we can talk about automation then. So are there any books, videos, organizations, blogs, Reddits that people should follow?
Okay. All right. Yeah, now you're asking. Okay, so I would recommend The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. That's a great book. Tells you how you would go about doing a startup in a lean way. Jeffrey Liker's books on the Toyota way, I think I mentioned in the last episode, but they are indispensable. Toyota themselves use them.
And how do you spell the surname?
Liker, Jeffrey Liker. Mike Rother, Toyota Carter, talks about how Toyota, that really gets into the weeds about how Toyota goes through the coaching and training cycle. And it's very, very detailed. Taiichi Ono, Workplace Management and the Toyota Production System is very good. John Cotter, Matsushita Leadership. Matsushita is the guy who founded Panasonic and is a lean company, a very interesting lean company. I actually used to work with Panasonic for years, so I have an affinity. I actually do like Panasonic. One of the companies I work for that I did like. 2 Second Lean by Paul Akers is a very, very good book. Taming Toxic People by David Gillespie tells you why you cannot have toxic people in a lean organization, spells it out in very clear terms. And then some kind of classics from this channel, The Very Less Stupid, Never Split the Difference, are very good. But in terms of podcasts, Lean Made Simple podcast on YouTube. Ryan Tierney from Northern Ireland. Marcus, if you can get him on your podcast, he would be an excellent guest. If you want to learn about a guy who created a culture from scratch. Never met the guy. I've never spoken to him, never met him, never emailed him, no contact with him at all, but I admire what he does a lot. And then Paul Akers from Fast Cap on YouTube.
We can tag him on this and see if he listens.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get Ryan Tierney to listen to this and come on your show, he would be a way, way better guest than I am to talk to you about lean.
Okay, you're fired.
Yeah, in my lean humility, I would defer to him.
How can people get a hold of you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Matt Gaskin on LinkedIn, and you can go to awesomizedwithazkeys.com and you can order some t-shirts. That'd be wonderful.
Excellent. Matt Gaskin, thank you.
All right, take care. Cheers, have a good one. Thanks, Marcus.
So this is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. If you're listening and you want to know whether trust is really being executed in your system, ask yourself this. Can your people say what they mean without fear it'll cost them? And when trust breaks, does your system know how to repair it or just replace people? If that hit a nerve, then drop me a DM with just one sentence. Where trust held or where it cracked. That's it. In the meantime, stay safe and happy. Bye-bye.